Okay, I'm very excited to have on the Goldstein on Geld show the Money Guy show hosts Bo Hanson and Brian Preston. If you haven't heard the show, check it out at money-guy.com. Bo and Brian, how you guys doing today?
Doing great, Doug. So excited to be on your show. Thank you for even inviting and having us on here.
Yeah, it's actually sort of cool because the funny thing is that even though I'm in Israel and you are in some other country, we actually end up doing a lot of the same stuff, right? You work with people. I mean, sometimes we call it financial planning or wealth management. And, one of the things that I find, even though I'm dealing with people cross-border, is that they're dealing with the same issues. Like, the market often feels a little bit crazy and people kind of want to take big risks on what they're doing because they get basically no interest on safe money. How do you tell someone that he's got to begin to protect himself instead of just taking big risks when protection usually means low yields?
Yeah, we talk to people. Matter of fact, we had a show we recorded this morning talking about there's two elements of investing that people usually get one of them, but they don't understand the second one is risk tolerance and risk capacity. Because we all want to, understand that the basic component of investing is you have to take some level of risk. And we always try to explain to people that you've got to understand your goals, when you think you want to, reach those goals, your age, your capacity to understand and absorb the risk, which is the risk tolerance, but also taking into account your age, which is that risk capacity, because you don't want to get in a situation where you swing for the fences and try to get a great rate of return, but get hurt. But it's the other thing that you mentioned, Doug, is that you don't want to be so worried about the risk that you're so conservative that you don't even reach your goals.
Tell me what you mean by risk capacity, because to me, risk tolerance means can you stand the pain of watching your money drop? What do you mean by risk capacity?
Yeah, risk capacity is how much volatility, how much risk can your situation handle? So the real easy way to think about this is if you're someone who's still young in your 20s, 30s, or even 40s, you have a lot of time that you can overcome any sort of financial volatility or hardship you see. You can go work a few more years, put in a few more hours, whatever the case may be. As you begin to age, when you get to ages late 50s, 60s, 70s, you may not have the 2, 3, 4 years that it takes for your portfolio to recover value. We always, subscribe to this notion that the markets will recover, but you have to have the longevity where you're there and you have the sustainability where you give it enough time so that it can recover.
And Doug, this comes into play, I'm sure with a lot of your clients too. You work with successful people that have a high risk tolerance because they're business owners, entrepreneurs, and you have to really explain the risk capacity because it is a different element than risk tolerance. Because some people can be cowboys in their business life, but as they get older, you have to help them protect them from themselves and that ability to take risks because they might not have the time to recover if we hit some bad downturns or have volatility.
It's funny you say that entrepreneurs are big risk takers. I often think the opposite. It's not really a topic of our discussion, but the guys I know, and I count myself amongst them, who are entrepreneurs tend to be incredibly careful. They think through everything, and it looks, they're often very successful, and you figure, oh, they must have taken a big risk to be successful. That's not necessarily the case. They're just very organized about how they do things. But being that is not our discussion, I want to go back on this risk tolerance thing because, one of the areas that I find, or one of the types of people that kind of wanders into my office a lot is someone who gets an inheritance. It's the first time they've dealt with money, and it could be a big inheritance. They get $1 million. And I begin to talk to them about risk tolerance and asset allocation. We kind of go through the whole story. The problem is that someone who's never invested before doesn't really know what his risk tolerance is. How do you teach someone to do that without all of a sudden, not trial by error?
Sure. Yeah, I think what you have to talk about is, especially if you've been doing this for any amount of time at all, you talk about some of the experiences you've had maybe through a volatile period. One thing that we do for anyone who comes in, whether they are highly educated in financial matters or if they're just starting out, is we kind of show them, if you look at a swath of diversified portfolios from very conservative, very aggressive, how each of those would have performed in an extreme market event like 2008. And then we asked them this question: if you were to hire us right now and you experienced this, what in your gut just starts to feel uncomfortable? If you saw your account decrease by 15%, 20%, 30%, 40%, where is your comfort level there? And then we show them, okay, well, let's look at that exact same portfolio, but instead of looking at it on a 1-year basis, let's talk about what it looks like on a 3-year, 5-year, and even an extended basis. It's a really nice measure of how much volatility they can stand in 1 year, even though we feel very comfortable that over a longer period it will rebound. That's a nice metric for how much risk they can really handle and kind of where their comfort level lies.
And Doug, what we like is by having an example, it not only is a great measure for us to kind of take some notes in the background to understand their risk tolerance, but it also is a great educational piece. So we always tell people it not only measures, it's not the power of just diversification, but it's the power of time. Because clients, when they see that it's not only that 1 year, it's the 3, it's the 5. There's a reason we tell people a long-term investment horizon is 5 to 7 years at a minimum. Don't come in and invest, if you're saving for a wedding, if you're saving for a trip for the family or a down payment on a house, that's not money that necessarily needs to be taking a tremendous amount of risk if you know you need that money in the next 24 months.
We're talking with Bo Hanson and Brian Preston of the Money Guys Show. If you haven't seen them on the Money Guys Show, and apart from appearing on the Goldstein on Gelt Show, you've probably seen them on the Fox Business Channel. You've seen them in U.S. News. You've seen them on the Wall Street Journal, Bankrate, Kiplinger's, Yahoo, Forbes, and more. We've been talking a lot about risk and risk tolerance and risk capacity, which is a critical idea for people to understand. It's the idea that you need to know not just how much you can emotionally stand, but how much risk your portfolio itself can stand. Guys, one of the things that I often try to do is, or one of the things I've realized over time is that professionals often talk in terms of percentages, but normal people don't think that way. So if we say, your portfolio might take a drop of 10%, that doesn't mean anything to a lot of people, A, because they may not even literally be able to do the math because it's just not their thing, or it just doesn't speak to them. But, when I'll tell a client, what would happen if you had $1 million in your account today and next month it was worth $870,000? What would you do? And all of a sudden they go, oh, that's what it means to lose 13%. They hear a number. I find that the way that you can help someone stress test his emotions is by putting real figures. And sometimes you'll say, it's $130,000. That's 3 brand new cars you could buy. And all of a sudden, that kind of changes the story a little bit. How do you stress test someone? How do you help someone to really see how much variability he could have in his financial plan?
It's funny because it's very similar to some of the things that we do, in the fact that we always, when we do the investment policy meeting with a brand new client, one of the first things we'll do for them is show them the best, worst case, kind of the good, bad, and the ugly of the portfolio we're proposing plus their old portfolio. So, because it's easy with Morningstar and other software out there to really show people to essentially jump in the DeLorean and go back in time and just take them back to how they probably felt in 2008 or 2000 when markets were volatile, and say, look, this is what the portfolio could do for you in these best as well as worst case scenarios. How does that make you feel? And it's you're right on, Doug, is that you can get so much information if you take the clients and kind of really gauge and understand and comprehend what their reactions are to those decisions, because that's also going to give you an insight into how emotional they're going to be the next time there is some volatility in the portfolio. And I think that's the big value adds that good financial advisors can do, is that you're not only just talking about the numbers like you and I were just talking about, you're also interpreting some of those emotional components that are so important on keeping the client on track and establishing and reaching those goals.
And Doug, another thing that I think is just really important, we do this with all of the retirement conversations we have with clients, is it's really important to talk about in terms of what those dollars mean today. Obviously, $1 million 10 years from now won't be worth the same thing that $1 million is worth today. So whenever we talk to clients about future retirement income and how they're going to pay for bills and what insurance is going to cost and expenses are going to cost, we always bring those back to today's dollars, because it's much easier to think about in terms of what $100 feels like today versus if that might be, $1,200 in retirement. So that's another way we really try to make it seem real for the client, always bringing those dollars back to what it would actually mean if it were to happen today.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think you need to realize that money is a very emotional thing, and so many of the decisions that people make are just because they are too nervous or too excited, and of course they're bombarded by advertising about how much money you could make. And one of the things that I find a lot, especially with retirees, is they no longer even need to make a lot of money. They've got pensions and they've got enough money to cover their expenses for the rest of their life, and it doesn't make sense for them to take on risk because if they lose the bet, they're going to be in trouble. And if they win the bet, so big deal. It just means they leave a bigger inheritance. And on top of that, they often can't even stand the stress. I think what you guys are both pointing out is the importance of each client really understanding how much stress he can handle, and based on the experiences that he's had both himself and what you show him on paper, so he can see a lot of different things that happened in the past, hopefully he can make a wise decision.
Yeah, Doug, I think you have just hit on something that we try to explain, because nobody knows this until they actually walk through that transition in life from being a worker and using your back, your hands, and your brain to create your income, to then relying upon your portfolio. You know it because you work with clients, and we know it because we work with clients through these transitions, is that there is something huge and major that occurs, that the first time you have a downturn or you have a volatile period in the financial markets, when you cannot go back into the workforce, it's good to have yourself really tied down, meaning having debt paid for, having that, your asset allocation reflect where you are from a risk capacity and risk tolerance standpoint. That's how you protect yourself, because otherwise you are going to realize there is a stress that you never knew existed when you go to that retirement phase of your life and you rely upon those assets, and you no longer can just say, hey, I'll just work a few more years. So that's a key thing. And I know you probably experienced that too, as you've watched your clients enter into retirement, and then you go, how are you handling this volatility? It's better if you get it right on the front end by measuring twice and cutting once when you design the portfolio, and as well as educate the client.
And certainly to err on the side of being a little safer. Always better to err on being a little more conservative than being a little more risky. Guys, we are just about out of time, but in the last few seconds, tell me, how can people follow you and follow your work?
Easily the best way you can reach us is go out to moneyguy.com. We are the Money Guy Show. We've been broadcasting for going on 12 years now. And Doug, I think we're very similar, is that we started this entire project as a passion project to just educate our listeners, because we found the more successful our listeners are, the more successful we are. It's kind of that pay it forward concept. So everybody can go check us out, moneyguy.com. You can also check us out on Twitter. I don't know, I made up a new social media thing there, but Twitter, you can listen to us at Money Guy Podcast, and that'll connect with us on Twitter as well.
Okay, we will put a link to all of that at the show notes of today's show at goldsteinongelt.com. Bo Hanson, Brian Preston, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks, you.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Check out all of Doug's money ideas at goldsteinongelt.com. Doug specializes in helping people who live outside the United States handle their U.S. investment accounts. If you have a question that you would like answered on the air or off, contact Doug at his website or send him an email to doug@profile-financial.com.